Mr. Secretary, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Appreciate you being willing to step up and do this, and it's nice to have a private sector guy in here trying to figure this out. I want to go to the debt in the portfolio. We've got about $20 trillion of debt all in. That's about a third of all sovereign debt in the world. There's about 200 trillion of total debt in the world. But one out of every three government debt dollars that are out there are ours. We also got the largest Fed balance sheet in history. And the question is during this period of low interest rates, about a little over 50%, I think, are 3 years or less in maturity, while the UK has about 48% of their bond portfolio is 20 years or longer. So my question is this something that you guys are taking a look at, and do you plan to go a little longer while interest rates are still in somewhat of a low environment?
It is. It's something that I've talked about. We are studying ultra-long bonds, which would be 50-year bonds or even longer. We've been working with the Treasury Borrowing Committee, which is outsiders to advise us on what the market for that is. And it's something that we'll consider as we look at debt management. No decision has been made, and we're seeking guidance as to the demand.
Great, thank you. Let's move to Basel III. Can we talk about that for a second?
We can, thank you.
It's part of your job, as I understand it. You know, it looks to me like that we are unilaterally way ahead of our other signatory partners in Basel III in terms of our capital reserve requirements. It looks to me like, as a business guy, that for small banks and community banks, regional banks, that they're inordinately hampered by the cost of compliance and also by this reserve requirement. Is there any attempt in your future priorities to look at what we're doing regarding our future commitments to Basel III and what we can do to get the other partners in Basel III to line up and at least catch up with us in terms of the commitment of safety for banks?
There is, and I've had conversations most recently when I was at the G7 in Bari with other board governors and other finance ministers about Basel III, and it's something that we'll be looking at as part of the President's executive order.
But no decisions taken yet regarding?
No decisions have been taken, and I think, as you know, Chairwoman Yellen is, the Fed is the one who technically participates in Basel, but it is something that we're looking at.
Okay,
thank you.
Thank you. I met with her this week and talked about that. We talked about the fact that we've got somewhere around $6 trillion of liquidity, that's U.S. liquidity, that's really not at work in the economy today, between the Russell 1000 balance sheets that have a very strong liquidity position, probably the strongest ever, a few $1 trillion in the bank balance sheets because of this capital reserve requirement, and then also this unrepatriated U.S. profits. Let me move to growth just for a second, because the capital investment is one that I think is a part of our future in terms of getting the economy moving again. It looks to me like the GAO has said that, our CBO has said that 1% of GDP growth is about $3 trillion over a decade in terms of federal impact on the federal budget. But yet we tend to talk in the Senate about spending cuts or tax increases as a bilateral conversation, and yet growth really is very rarely talked about because it's an esoteric term here in the Senate. But I know that's job one for you guys. Can you talk about how to balance those and relative to the 800-pound gorilla in the room relative to our deficit spending, and that is mandatory expenses, and how the President and how the administration sees fiscal policy now marrying up with the monetary policy of our future?
Well, let me just comment. You did talk about repatriation, and that is something that we are looking at as part of tax reform, because there are literally trillions of dollars sitting offshore. It's not a surprise with the highest corporate tax rate, worldwide taxation, and this concept of deferral. Why would U.S. companies bring money back? So as part of tax reform, we do hope that there are literally trillions of dollars that come back. And as it relates to the other economic issues, we look forward to continuing to talk to you about them.
But the corporate tax rate also puts U.S. companies at risk for foreign companies who have a lot of liquidity, who can come in and make an acquisition of a U.S. company and basically use the tax arbitrage to basically pay for that acquisition. Is that not correct?
They can indeed, and I hear that almost every day as I meet with business leaders, reminding me of that, particularly U.S. companies who feel like they're at risk of getting taken over and at risk of having the jobs moved outside of the United States. We have an uncompetitive system that we need to fix. And I would also just comment, there are several economic reports that over 70% of the corporate tax burden is actually borne by the workers. And for far too long, workers in this country have not had wage increases. That's something that we clearly saw when we met with hundreds of business leaders across the country, and something we're focused on.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.